The year was 1988. The month was August. The air was not air. It was a furnace door, opened and left that way. David Chen held the report in his hand. His hand was sweating. The paper was limp. He was the new county extension agent, 26 years old, full of ideas from a university, full of charts and modern chemistry. He knew what a drought looked like on paper. Corn yields down 70%, soybeans 80%. Hayfields were just brown dust. Cattle were being sold for pennies on the dollar. Bankruptcy notices were tacked to the co-op bulletin board. They were like funeral announcements for families still living. David's job was to measure the disaster, to record the numbers, to file the reports that would trigger federal aid. It was a job of documenting endings. He scanned the columns. Henderson Farms, 32 bushels per acre. Miller Creek Holdings, 28 bushels. Gable Family Trust, 19 bushels. Catastrophe, catastrophe, catastrophe. Then he saw the line. Vance, Eleanor. Acreage, 480. Crop, corn. Yield, 112 bushels per acre. He stopped. He read the line again. Vance, Eleanor. 112 bushels. It had to be a typo. A secretary must have hit the 1 twice. Or maybe she'd meant 12, not 112. 12 was still a disaster, but it made sense. 112 was impossible. It was a number from a good year. A wet year. Not this year. Not the year the creeks ran dry and the earth cracked open. He circled the name with his red pen. He put a question mark beside it. The silence in his office was thick with heat. The fan on his desk just moved the hot air around. He picked up the phone. He called the grain elevator, asked for Bill, the weighmaster. "Bill, you weigh a load for Eleanor Vance?" Bill coughed on the other end. "Sure did, David, 2 days ago." "What was the moisture content?" "A little high, 17%, but the test weight was good." "And the yield?" David held his breath. Bill chuckled a dry, dusty chuckle. "You won't believe it." "I didn't. Had to calibrate the scale twice. She's pulling over 100 bushels." "In this?" Bill's voice went quiet. "In this. While everyone else is pulling nothing. It's not right. But it's true." David hung up the phone. He looked at the name again. Vance, Eleanor. He knew the name. He'd heard whispers at the coffee shop. The crazy widow. The woman who farmed with weeds. The one who refused to spray. The one who left her fields a mess. A joke, mostly. A cautionary tale for young farmers. Don't go getting ideas like Eleanor Vance. He grabbed his keys. He had to see it for himself. He drove his county sedan out of town. The pavement turned to gravel. The dust plumed up behind him, a dirty brown cloud. On his left, Henderson's fields. Stalks were brittle, yellow-brown. Ears of corn were small, shrunken. Most hadn't pollinated at all. On his right, Miller's fields. The same story. A landscape of failure. Then he saw it. Up ahead. A line. As if someone had drawn it in the dirt. On one side of the fence, brown. On the other side, not green. Not the deep, lush green of June, but a muted, dusty green. A living green. He pulled over. He got out of the car. The heat hit him like a physical blow. He walked to the fence line. He was looking at Eleanor Vance's farm. Her corn was shorter than Henderson's. The stalks were thicker. And between the rows, it wasn't clean dirt. It was a carpet of something else. Clover, he thought, and other low-growing plants. Weeds. To any other farmer, it was a poorly kept field, a sign of laziness. But the corn was alive. The leaves were not curled tight against the sun. They were open, working, and on every stalk, a full, healthy ear was pointing toward the sky. David Chen, the man from the university, the man of science and data, felt something he couldn't quite name. It was the feeling of everything he thought he knew turning to dust in his mouth. He was looking at the impossible, a field that shouldn't exist, a harvest in the middle of a famine. And it was all because of a woman everyone had dismissed. A woman who, 23 years earlier, had been told she couldn't do it. Not just that she would fail, but that she wasn't even allowed to try. This channel is built on stories just like this one. Stories of people who were counted out, who were told no, who looked at the world differently and were punished for it, until they were proven right. If you believe these are the stories that matter, the ones we need to hear now more than ever, then please subscribe to this channel. Help us keep telling them. Because what happened to Eleanor Vance started with a quiet conversation in a small office. A conversation that could have ended her, but instead, it began everything. Let me tell you about the next 23 years. Let me tell you how this field came to be. Rewind. The year is 1965. The month is March. The air smells of thaw and wet earth. Eleanor Vance is 32 years old. She has been a widow for 6 months. A tractor rollover. A freak accident. It took her husband John, and it took the farm's future with him. She sits in the lobby of the Farm Credit Services office. The chair is hard wood. The air smells of old paper and coffee. She wears her best dress. It feels too tight. She holds a file folder in her lap. Inside are her plans, soil maps drawn by her father, crop rotation schedules, a budget written out in neat, careful lines. She is here for an operating loan, money for seed, for fuel, for the year. The same loan John had gotten every spring for 10 years. A formality. The door opens. Mr. Frank Henderson smiles at her. "Eleanor, come on in." Frank Henderson was a good man. Everyone in the county would tell you that. He served on the church board. He coached Little League. His own farm was a model of efficiency. Clean rows, perfectly straight lines, the newest equipment. He was the president of the loan committee. He was the gatekeeper. His office was neat. Family photos on the desk, a plaque for Community Man of the Year on the wall. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Please." He looked at her with genuine sympathy. "I was so sorry to hear about John. A terrible thing. A loss for the whole community." "Thank you, Frank." She slid the folder across the desk. "I'm here for the spring operating loan. It's all in there. My plan for the season." Frank didn't open the folder. He folded his hands on top of it. He leaned forward. His voice was kind. It was gentle. And that's what made it so much worse. "Eleanor," he said. "John was a fine farmer, one of the best. But farming it's a hard business for a man, let alone for a woman on her own. I can do it, Frank. I've worked this land my whole life. I know it better than anyone." "I know you do. I have no doubt. But this plan here," he tapped the folder. "I've heard you and your father have some different ideas about things, about not plowing, about leaving weeds between the rows. They're not weeds, Frank. They're cover crops. They hold the moisture. They fix the nitrogen." He held up a hand, a soft, placating gesture. "I'm not a scientist, Eleanor. I'm a banker and a farmer. And I've been farming for 30 years. I know what a good field looks like. It looks clean. What you're proposing, it's a risk, a very big one. The bank has a responsibility to its members. We can't finance an experiment. It's not an experiment. It's knowledge passed down. My grandfather farmed this way. Times have changed. We have chemicals now. We have powerful tractors. We don't have to live in the past." He leaned back in his chair. His face was a mask of sincere concern. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't malice. This was a man who genuinely believed he was protecting her from herself, protecting the bank from a bad investment, protecting the memory of her husband. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping lower, "I'm not going to be the man who loans you the money to lose your family's farm. I just can't do it." The words hung in the air, not a negotiation, a verdict. She felt the blood drain from her face. This was not anger, not contempt. It was something softer, and in some ways worse. It was certainty. His certainty about her limitations. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend. By someone who smiled while they said it. Someone who truly believed they were helping you by holding you back. That is the most dangerous limitation of all, because you cannot fight it with anger. It is a wall of kindness, a prison of protection, and it can only be disproven with decades of quiet, lonely work. If you know that feeling, drop a comment below and tell us about it, because Eleanor Vance stood up. She took her folder from his desk. Her hands were steady. Her voice was quiet. "I see. Thank you for your time, Frank." She walked out of the office, past the secretary who wouldn't meet her eyes, out into the bright March sunlight. She didn't go to another bank. She knew the answer would be the same. Frank Henderson's opinion carried weight in this county. He had decided. She was not a farmer. She was a widow. A problem to be managed. She drove the 5 miles home. The truck rattled on the gravel road. She parked it by the barn. Her father was sitting on the porch swing. He was 75. His hands were gnarled with arthritis. His lungs were weak, but his eyes were clear. He watched her walk from the truck to the porch. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw the way she carried her shoulders. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. She sat down on the top step, her back to him. She looked out at the 160 acres that were her entire world. The land her great-grandfather had bought. The land her husband was buried in. The land Frank Henderson was certain she would lose. The porch swing creaked. Her father's voice was raspy, but it was firm. "They took everything from us once before, Ellie." He was talking about the Depression. The bank took the equipment, took the livestock, took the pride. They took everything, he said again. Except the dirt. The dirt is enough. He stood up, groaning slightly. He came and stood behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Remember what I taught you. The weeds know things. The weeds know things." It was his mantra, his core belief. A piece of folk wisdom that sounded like nonsense to men like Frank Henderson, to men who believed in clean rows and chemical solutions, to men who fought nature into submission. Her father believed in partnership. He believed the soil was a living thing, that it needed to be covered, that certain weeds, clover, vetch, alfalfa, were not enemies, they were allies. They shaded the ground, kept it cool, held the water from the spring rains. Their roots broke up the hardpan clay, and they pulled nitrogen from the air, feeding the corn for free. A truth older than any university study. A truth written in the land itself. Eleanor closed her eyes. She felt the warmth of her father's hand. She felt the cool spring breeze on her face. Frank Henderson had said no. The world had said no. But the dirt had not. The dirt was waiting. "All right," she said. Just that. One word. A promise to herself, to her father, to the land. That night, she sold her husband's new tractor, the big one, the one with the radio. She sold it to a neighbor for half what it was worth. He didn't haggle. He knew she was desperate. She sold the big plow, too, the one that turned the earth over, leaving it black and bare. She kept the old equipment, the small cultivator, the 2-row planter, things she could fix herself. She took the cash. She drove to town, not to the bank, to the feed store. She bought seed corn, an open pollinated variety, not a hybrid, one she could save her own seed from. And she bought bags of other seeds, Dutch white clover, hairy vetch, winter rye. The man at the counter looked at her order. He raised an eyebrow. "Planting a pasture, Eleanor?" "No," she said. "Planting a cornfield." The man just shook his head and took her money. The work began. She couldn't afford hired help. Her father was too old to do more than give advice from the porch. So she worked alone, from before sunup to after sundown. She didn't plow. That was the first sin. In that county, in that time, the spring plow was a ritual, a sign of a good farmer, a clean slate. Her field stayed covered in the stubble of last year's crop. The neighbors drove by. They slowed their trucks. They shook their heads. "She's given up," they said at the coffee shop. "The grief has taken her." Then she planted, right into the stubble. Her old 2-row planter struggled. It bucked and jammed. She'd get down, clear the discs with her bare hands, get back on the tractor, and go another 20 feet. It took her a week to plant what John would have planted in a day. After the corn was in, she did something else that made no sense to anyone. She broadcast the other seeds, the clover and the vetch, between the rows, on top of the ground. Now the talk in town turned from pity to ridicule. "She's planting weeds on purpose. She's lost her mind." Frank Henderson heard the talk. He felt a pang of sadness. He had been right, he thought. He had done the right thing. He had saved her from a bigger failure later. The spring was wet that year. The rain came soft and steady. In the clean fields of her neighbors, the water ran off. It carried their topsoil with it. Little brown rivers cutting through the black earth. In Eleanor's fields, there was no runoff. The stubble and the growing cover crops held the water, like a sponge. Every drop stayed where it fell. Her corn came up. It was green and strong. And between the rows, a carpet of green began to grow. The clover, the vetch. She cultivated only once, a narrow sweep right beside the corn row, just enough to keep the weeds from choking out the young plants. The rest she left alone. By June, her fields looked shaggy, unkempt, wild. The other fields were pristine, black earth between ruler-straight rows of corn, the picture of modern agriculture. That summer, a man named Hemlock stopped his truck, an old man, older than her father. He farmed the 80 acres north of her. He walked out into her field. Eleanor watched him from the barn. He knelt down. He dug his fingers into the soil between the rows. He looked at the clover. He looked at the corn. He stood up and walked back to his truck. He drove to her house. She met him on the porch. He didn't waste words. "My father used to do this." He nodded toward the field. Everyone told him he was crazy too. He looked at her. His eyes were watery blue. "You need help with harvest, you let me know." He got back in his truck and drove away. It was the first time in months she didn't feel completely alone. The summer turned dry in July. The rains stopped. The sun beat down. In the clean fields, the black earth baked hard. The moisture evaporated. The corn leaves started to curl, a sign of thirst. In Eleanor's fields, the ground was different. It was shaded by the carpet of clover. It was cool to the touch. The moisture from the spring rains was still there, trapped beneath the living mulch. Her corn didn't curl. It kept growing. The harvest came. Mr. Hemlock showed up with his 2-row corn picker. Didn't even ask, just started working. She drove the wagon. They worked in silence for 2 days. When they were done, she had a yield, 95 bushels per acre. Her neighbors, on their clean, chemical-fed fields, averaged 80. She had spent less than half of what they had on fertilizer and chemicals. Her profit per acre was nearly double. It was a small victory, a quiet one. Nobody in town believed it. They said Hemlock was lying for her. They said she got lucky, a fluke. It won't happen again. Frank Henderson heard the numbers. He didn't believe them either. But for the first time, a flicker of doubt entered his mind. A tiny, unwelcome seed. Eleanor took her profits. She didn't buy a new dress. She didn't fix the roof. She bought more clover seed. And she paid her property taxes. Cash. The next year, 1966, she did it again. The year after that, 1967, she did it again. Each year the soil got better, darker, richer, full of earthworms. Her yields slowly climbed. The talk in town didn't stop. But it changed. It went from ridicule to grudging curiosity. They still called it Vance's folly, but the laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet, confused watchfulness. Because this is where the story becomes bigger than one woman and one farm. It becomes about the slow, undeniable power of being right when the whole world is wrong. Let me tell you about the next 20 years. This is how you prove something, not with words, with decades. By 1970, Eleanor Vance had saved $5,000. The 40 acres to her west came up for sale. The farmer had gone bankrupt. He had farmed the modern way, clean rows, heavy debt. She went to the auction. She stood in the back. The men from the big farms were there. Frank Henderson was there, representing the bank. The bidding was fast. It reached a price Eleanor could afford. She raised her hand. A silence fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to her. The crazy widow with the weedy fields. Frank Henderson saw her. His face was unreadable. The auctioneer looked at her. Sold to Eleanor Vance. After, the bank's lawyer came to her. He asked about financing. She opened her purse. She handed him an envelope. "It's all there," she said. Cash. She bought the 40 acres. Cash. By 1975, Old Man Hemlock passed away. His children lived in the city. They wanted to sell his 80 acres. They offered it to her first. Out of respect, they said. She paid their price. Cash. By 1980, her farm was 280 acres, every piece bought with money she earned from the soil. No loans, no debt, no asking for permission. Each year the pattern was the same. Spring, planting into the stubble, broadcasting the clover. Summer, watching her fields stay green a little longer than everyone else's when it got dry. Fall, harvesting yields that were always 10, sometimes 20% higher than the county average, while her input costs were 50% lower. The contrast math was undeniable. It was a quiet rebellion, fought with spreadsheets and soil health. Frank Henderson watched it all. He was retired from the bank now. His son ran their family farm, ran it the modern way, the way Frank had taught him. Big equipment, lots of chemicals, lots of debt. Sometimes, Frank would drive the county roads, a habit from his banking days. He'd drive past Eleanor's place. He'd see her fields, still shaggy, still unkempt, but expanding, year by year, absorbing the neat, clean farms around them that had failed. He never stopped. He never waved. He just watched. The witness who watches. It is its own form of justice. The quiet, long-term observation of a mistake. A mistake made with the best of intentions. A mistake that cost someone else years of struggle. And what did he feel? Not anger, not jealousy. Something more complicated. A slow, creeping realization that the world he was so certain about was built on fragile ground. His clean rows looked powerful, but they were brittle, dependent. Eleanor's weedy rows looked weak, but they were resilient, self-sufficient. The weeds know things. Her father's words echoed in her mind. They had become her truth. By 1985, she farmed 400 acres. She was no longer a joke. She was an enigma. Younger farmers, the ones with university degrees, started stopping by. Not to laugh, to ask questions. She'd walk them through her fields. She'd show them the earthworms. She'd explain the nitrogen cycle. She didn't preach. She just showed them the results. The soil under her fence line was dark and crumbly. The soil under their fence line was pale and hard. She gave them the one thing they couldn't get from a salesman or a banker: proof. And then came 1988, the year of the Great Drought, the year the theories were put to the ultimate test, the year the rain simply stopped. It started in June. A dry week turned into a dry month. The sun was relentless. By July, the corn in the clean fields was in trouble. By August, it was dying. Farmers stood at the edge of their fields and watched their net worth wither on the stalk. The modern system, so powerful in good years, had no answer for this. The chemicals couldn't make it rain. The big tractors couldn't conjure moisture. The whole system was built on the assumption of water. Take that away, and it collapsed. But Eleanor's system was different. It was built for this. For 23 years, she had been saving water. Every drop of every spring rain was stored in her soil, held in place by the organic matter, protected from the sun by the living mulch of clover. Her soil was a canteen she had been filling for 2 decades. Now, when the world was thirsty, she took a long, slow drink. Her corn didn't thrive. It survived. It held on. The lower leaves fired, but the stalks stayed alive. The ears filled. Not like a wet year, but they filled. Which brought us back to David Chen, the young county agent, standing at the fence line, looking at the impossible. He finally got back in his car. He drove up her lane. She was on the porch, an older woman now, 55, her face lined by the sun, her hands strong. She watched him approach. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't unkind. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm David Chen, the new extension agent. I saw your yield report. I know. I had to see for myself." She nodded. "People usually do. Can you tell me how? How did you do this?" She looked out at her field, the one everyone had laughed at, the one that was now the only success in a sea of failure. "I listened," she said. "To who?" "To the land." She invited him inside. She made him iced tea. She sat at her kitchen table, and for 2 hours she explained. She told him about her father, about the cover crops, about the soil health, about the bank, about Frank Henderson. She spoke in quiet, factual sentences, no bitterness, no triumph, just the story. David Chen listened. He didn't take notes, he just listened. He was a student again, learning a language he didn't know existed. When he left, the sun was setting. He shook her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. You've given this county more than a crop. You've given it a lesson." The story spread, first through the county, then the state. A reporter came from Des Moines. then a crew from a national farm journal. They took pictures of her shaggy fields. They took samples of her dark, rich soil. They called her a genius, a pioneer, a visionary. She just shrugged. "I'm just a farmer," she'd say. One evening, a week after the first article came out, another truck pulled into her lane. An expensive truck. Clean. An old man got out. He moved slowly, with a cane. It was Frank Henderson. She was washing dishes, looking out the kitchen window. She saw him coming. She dried her hands and went to the door. She met him on the porch. They stood there for a long moment. The crickets were starting their evening song. Frank didn't look at her. He looked out at the field of corn. Her corn. The corn that shouldn't exist. "I read the article in the paper," he said. His voice was frail. "They made you sound like some kind of hero." She didn't say anything. He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were full of a lifetime of certainty, now shattered. "My son, Tom. He's going to lose the farm. The drought, it wiped him out. He took everything I taught him, everything his grandfather taught me, and he did it all right. And it all went wrong." He paused. The words were hard for him. He had been the man with the answers for so long. Now he had none. "I was wondering..." He looked down at his hands, gripping the top of his cane. "I was wondering if you would talk to him, if you could teach him what you do." Here it was, the reckoning, the moment she might have dreamed of for 23 years, the moment the man who said she couldn't do it came to ask her for help. She could have been triumphant. She could have been angry. She could have reminded him of his words. "I'm not going to be the man who loans you the money to lose your farm." She could have thrown that kindness back in his face, but she didn't. Her heroism was in her work, and in her restraint. She looked at the old man, the kind man who had tried to protect her, the certain man who had been so wrong. And she delivered the quiet devastation. "Frank," she said, her voice even, "I've been teaching him for 23 years. He and everyone else. They just weren't watching." She let the words sit in the air. Then she softened. "Tell Tom to come by tomorrow morning. We'll walk the fields." Frank Henderson nodded. He couldn't speak. He turned and walked slowly back to his truck. A man unmade. A man remade. In the face of a truth he had refused to see. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind is the loneliest fight there is. There is no villain to vanquish, only a good person's certainty to dismantle. And it takes a lifetime. But that's not the end of the story, because a legacy is not what you accomplish. It's what you leave for others to build upon. Eleanor Vance didn't stop with teaching Tom Henderson. Her farm became a classroom. They called it the Vance method. At first, it was a local curiosity. Then agricultural students from the state university started coming. Then scientists from the Department of Agriculture. They brought probes and sensors. They measured soil temperature, water infiltration, microbial activity. They put numbers and charts to what her father knew in his bones. The weeds know things. They proved it. The living mulch kept the soil 10 degrees cooler on a summer day. It cut water evaporation by nearly 70%. The earthworms and the root channels allowed the soil to absorb 8 inches of rain in an hour with no runoff. Her farm was a miracle of resilience, and it was built from observation, from humility, from the simple act of watching and learning. In 1995, she used the profits from her farm to establish the Vance Scholarship for Women in Regenerative Agriculture. The first recipient was a young woman from a bankrupt dairy farm. The scholarship paid for her entire university education. Today, there have been more than 50 Vance scholars. They are agronomists, farmers, policy advisors. They are spreading her quiet revolution across the country. Eleanor never got married again. She said the land was her partner. She farmed until she was 70. Then she turned the operation over to a young couple, one of her first unofficial students. She didn't sell it to them. She leased it for $1 a year. The only condition was that they had to farm her way, and they had to keep the farm open as a teaching center. She lived out her days in the small farmhouse, sitting on the porch her father had sat on, watching the fields, watching the endless stream of visitors who came to learn. She passed away in 2010. At her funeral, the church was overflowing. The crowd was a mix of old farmers in seed corn hats and young scientists with laptops. David Chen, now a director at the State Department of Agriculture, gave the eulogy. He told the story of that day in 1988, of the impossible number on a piece of paper. He said, "Eleanor Vance taught us that a farm is not a factory. It's a community of soil and water and plants and people. And if you take care of the community, it will take care of you." After she died, they turned the old farmhouse into a small museum, a center for the study of her work. And on the main wall of the living room, there is a single framed object. It's not an award, it's not a photograph. It's a page from an old notebook. The paper is yellowed and brittle. The handwriting is her father's. It's a hand-drawn map of their original 160 acres, with notes in the margins. Clover here to break up the clay. Rye after corn to hold the soil through winter. More worms on the north slope. It is the physical artifact of generational knowledge, the proof that the most profound innovations are sometimes just the act of remembering what we've been taught to forget. A young woman, a Vance scholar, is a tour guide at the museum now. Sometimes she will see an old visitor stop in front of that map and just stand there for a long time, touching the glass, remembering. The land remembers. The soil remembers. The story is written there, in the dark, rich earth of a farm that was once called a folly. Right now, somewhere, someone is being told they can't. Someone is sitting in an office, across a desk from a kind person who is explaining their limitations to them. Someone is being protected from their own ambition. This story is for them, the proof that the world's certainty is no match for your quiet, persistent work. The gap between what they decide for you and what you can actually do, that is where your life is forged. If this story means something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is facing a wall of kind refusal. And subscribe for more stories of the quiet rebels who remake our world. Leave a comment. Tell us about a time you chose to listen to the land, or your gut, or your history instead of the experts. Because the weeds know things, and sometimes so do we.